Well, I'd like to extend my own welcome to all of you this morning to the retreat here. All of us are here this morning because we want to be here. Those of you who are on the retreat and those of us who are facilitators. So on this sort of cold and snowy Saturday morning when we could be doing many other things, including sleeping more or whatever, we've chosen to give priority to this retreat and to our faith and to this encounter with Jesus. And we're in this time of Advent, and I'd like to explore in my sharing with you two words, Advent and mission. And Carolyn mentioned I'm a linguist, and I always enjoy looking at the root words, the etymology of words, and both Advent and mission come from Latin words. So as you probably know from all of our catechetical education, Advent means coming or arrival, adveniat. So the coming or the arriving. And mission comes from the Latin word mittere, which means to send. So there's a coming and a going, an arrival and a departure. And I thought we could reflect in terms of what is this Advent, or who is arriving? And of course, it's Jesus who is arriving in our humanity. Emmanuel, God with us. And so we hear this this message from the prophets that God has felt and heard our pain, our human condition, and has taken on this love to be born into our humanity as a person, the person of Jesus. And that is the person that we want to get to know better in our whole lives. And this retreat is just one day. It's the start of another Advent season when we can pay particular attention to our prayer and to explore and open our hearts to hear what Jesus will say to us. So the first Advent, the first arrival of Jesus in our humanity, of course, happened 2,000 years ago in Bethlehem. And we celebrate his birthday, December 25th, as we celebrate our own birthdays and have cake and have a party and joy and music. And so Advent is, in part, it's that celebrating that Jesus was born, and that, as John says in his gospel, God so loved the world so much. God loved the world so much, he sent his only Son into the world. We also, it's a time of preparing ourselves for the second coming, when Jesus will come definitively at the end of time. But we don't know that. That's a mystery. When will that happen? The early Christian communities expected that it would happen quite soon. Even St. Paul felt that he would see Jesus arrive in the final coming. And then as time went on and people realized, well, the time is not yet, and Jesus tells his disciples in the parables that don't worry about when the second coming is going to happen. Be concerned with today, with now. And so that's the other way that Jesus comes into our lives, is existentially. How do I encounter Jesus in my life? One way is through our prayer, and for making that time each day, if it's only 10 minutes in the morning or the afternoon or the evening, to spend 10 minutes in prayer, even if it's just sitting. And the other way that we recognize Jesus in our lives is through other people. When I meet Carolyn or Gerard or Rebecca or Maria, I'm also meeting Christ in each of these people. And some people Christ speaks to us more loudly through some people sometimes than others. First off, our parents or our grandparents who teach us about faith. And then, of course, Christ will speak to us through the events in our lives, the type of work, our passion about our work, what we study, accidents that may happen, or good things that happen to us, successes. Jesus is there in all of that. So there is this arrival. We want to welcome Jesus into our lives in the many ways that he wants to offer himself to us. And so this is, the retreat today is this time when we can, as Vanessa was saying, we can let go of our busy lives and turn off the computers and put away the smartphones or whatever type of phone and put everything down and open up our hands, our empty hands. So I want you just, if you're holding your book, to just take one hand and hold it empty. And that is the exercise that we want to do today. Look at our empty hand. And people that say that when you pray, physiologically, our hand gets more relaxed. We can even see sometimes a change in the skin tone, the blood coursing to our hands. And so our retreat today is this waiting for God to come into our lives. When we look at the history of the people of God, we see that God has always come at very different times. One of the first was when God appeared to Abraham and invited Abraham to go on a journey looking for the promised land. Don't let your hand down. And Abraham, he wasn't alone. He had his wife Sarah with him. So we have to remember that it was Abraham and Sarah and the people of God that left that ancient city of Ur, which is somewhere where Iraq is today, I believe, a very still troubled part of our world. And they went on this journey of faith into the unknown, looking and searching for the promised land. And then, of course, later in the history of the people of God, there was Moses. And God appeared to Moses in a burning bush and gave him a mission to lead the people out of slavery in Egypt, and to cross the Red Sea, and again to return to the promised land. And when they had crossed the Red Sea, it was Miriam who sings a song of praise for God's action. And then through the many years in the promised land, God would speak through the prophets. The word prophet means to speak forth. And we hear Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, saying, promising to the people, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. And so this is God saying to the prophet Isaiah, appearing to Isaiah and urging him to proclaim to the people of God that God will appear definitively in our human history by being born as a human being, as a man. So this is how God appears in our lives, and I think each of us can reflect, well, how has God appeared in your life? Or how is God appearing in your life now? That may be a question, one of the first big question that we can reflect on during the day or try to discern. Some of you may have already explored that and you can name, God appears in my life, and this God appeared this way, or is appearing through this person, or is this event in my life. And sometimes it's good to name that and write it down, because it makes it very concrete when we put it down in words in our booklet. Just for us, as Vanessa said, we don't share it with anybody, it's our own personal reflection. So part of this retreat, I think, is this trying to name and discern how God is arriving in our lives. How is God adventing us? We can turn it into a verb. God advents us. God comes to us. God arrives in our lives. It may not be clear to you right now. That's okay. There can be clouds. There can be a desert sometimes. But eventually God will, if not today, at some point in your life, appear and speak to you. The other word is mission, to be sent. As I mentioned, the verb mittere from Latin, to send. And so whenever God appeared to these people in the history of the people of God, he also not just appears, God gives this mission or task. And to Abraham and Sarah, it was to go and seek out the promised land. It was to go and to found the people of God that would be as innumerable as the sands that exist, or the stars in heaven. And then, of course, with Moses, the task was to be the liberator, to free the people, to be the leader. And with the prophets, the task was to speak, to be the voice for God. Now, usually the person is fearful of the mission. Maybe the prophet said, who am I? Jeremiah, I can't speak. I don't know how to speak. I'm just about a child. And so there's this sense of fear, or this like retraction, or Moses didn't want to be the leader. But then God constantly is urging the person and with this mission, repeating and encouraging this mission. And then God appeared to a young Hebrew woman named Mary, Maria, in the person of an angel, Gabriel. And God asked Mary, will you be the mother of Emmanuel, of my child? Will you say yes? And we know that Mary's reaction was one of fear. Initially, who am I? I'm not worthy, and how will this happen? And wonderment. And so there was this, and that can be consoling to us because it means that when we hear God asking us for a mission or to undertake a task or a sort of work or whatever the mission may be, to get married to somebody, to become a priest or a sister, to become a lay person working full-time in the church, to become a missionary, there can be this sort of hesitation and fear of the unknown. And that's normal, and it's natural. But Mary received grace. Hail Mary, full of grace. She had the grace, she received the grace to say yes. And we know, of course, that she did become the Mother of God. And one of the prayers in the booklet that you can pray is the Magnificat on page 16, her song of joy. As Miriam sang a praise for the God liberating the people from the slavery in Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, and going to the Promised Land, Mary as well says and praises God in this prayer, which is prayed by our church every day for those who pray the Liturgy of the Hours. We also know that Joseph received a mission. So Joseph, as we know, he was betrothed to Mary. He was going to marry Mary, but he discovers that she is with child, and it's not his. And as a righteous Jewish man, he could condemn her. He decides to do so quietly so that her family will not be dishonored. But then God speaks to Joseph in a dream and says in the dream, do not be afraid, marry her because she will bear my son, Emmanuel. And so Joseph overcomes his fears, his hesitations, his fear of shame or embarrassment. Can you imagine all the emotions he's going through? And so he says yes to God. And then he becomes the father that raises Jesus as a young man, that teaches him carpentry, that together with Mary educate him in the faith. And then we finally come to our brother Jesus himself. And Jesus, his advent, God's advent with Jesus was so intense every day that Jesus says in the Gospel of John, the Father and I are one. He was so intimately connected at every moment with God, the creator of the universe, and that is part of what we call the mystery of the Trinity, that he is one with the Father. And Jesus was also asked to take on a number of missions. And the first mission that he proclaims near the beginning of Luke's Gospel in chapter 4 is when he goes into the synagogue and he takes the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and reads it aloud. He says, the Spirit of God is upon me to bring good news to the poor and to liberate the captives and give sight to the blind and to proclaim the year of grace for my people. And that was his mission. It's very clear. You know, the agenda was there. And all of what Jesus lived, the miracles and the healing and his discourses and his challenge to the authorities was part of that mission. And then towards the end of his life, when his enemies, the enemies of this good news, those that want to just proclaim bad news, when they threatened him, God asked him in the agony of the garden, will you accept even death? Death on the cross for this mission. And Jesus, as we know, he shed tears of blood. He was in that agony. Do I say yes or no? And we know he said yes. And we know God did not leave him on the cross, but God brought him back to new life in something totally beyond our imagination, this resurrection to new life, this resurrection to eternal life that is offered to all of us through Jesus. And this transformation, the resurrection, is so unknown that the disciples did not recognize Jesus when he appeared. He was transformed. And that is what we hope to one day, that we will be definitively transformed into this new and eternal life. So I'm been talking on and on about these two ideas of God coming into our lives and then of us receiving a mission. And I believe that it happens for each human being, for all of us. If we are attentive, and if we are discerning, and if we pray, and if we talk to people, we have mentors and friends who help us discern that. And this retreat today can be one moment of discerning that, naming how is God in my life and what is my mission. I just want to talk a little bit about and share about Scarboro missions in this place where you are today. God appeared to Monsignor John Fraser, a young man who in the late 1890s and early 1900s felt a call to be a priest here for the Diocese of Toronto. He went to Italy to study in a seminary in Italy, and while he was there, he met many missionaries coming from China. And as he heard these stories about the people of China and their suffering, he felt a call in his heart to go to China. And so his initial calling to Toronto Diocese was moved to one of being a missionary. And he came back and eventually founded Scarborough Foreign Missions in 1918. And this building that we're in was built in 1923 as the China Seminary. And many priests and later lay people came to Scarborough because also of this calling of wanting to serve people overseas. Now you see in the vocation of Monsignor Fraser, it changed through an event in his life by going to that seminary in Italy at the time and meeting these missionaries who in their discourse and their sharing and their experiences influenced or helped direct his call in a new way. And that's a sign how these different callings can happen. I'd just like to share a little bit of my own journey. I grew up in Nova Scotia in a very Roman Catholic family. We would say the rosary every night on our knees, and my mother would pray the Litany of the Saints. And of course we went to Mass every Sunday and at other times. And my parents were involved in eastern Nova Scotia what was called the cooperative and credit union movement back in the 1930s and 40s, and that was to help fishermen and farmers come out of their situations of poverty and to have a life of dignity through these economic organizations, co-ops and credit unions. So that heavily influenced me, and when I went to university, I started to learn about Latin America, about international situations, or the fact that Canada is a rich country, countries in Latin America are poor, there many were dictatorships. And I felt growing in my heart the desire to go to Latin America and to be with the poor and see if I could serve in some way. So after college, I went for a year, saved up my money, and went to visit Scarborough priests for 2 months, working in Lima, Peru, in the slums. And that experience mesmerized me, caught me. It was like the pearl of great price or the treasure in the field. And so when I came back to Canada, I thought I want to become a missionary. So I joined Scarborough's lay program, which at the time was a 3-year commitment, 1 year of formation here, and then 2 years of service overseas. And I went, they assigned me to Mexico, and I spent these 2 years in Mexico working among the Mayan indigenous peoples, the Tzotzil people, helping a priest in the parish, learning their language, helping with Bible studies. And it was, again, a time where I felt a deeper call, and that was to priesthood and to be a missionary priest in Latin America for my life vocation. And so now, in retrospect, when I look back and I see that God was calling me slowly, oh, come for 2 months, now come for 2 years, okay, come for the rest of your life. And that's good, you know. And I remember when I was, those 2 years in Mexico, I was 24 when I went, and after my first year, I was turning 25, and I entered this sort of crisis. I'm like, God, at in no time I'll be 30, my life is over at 30, I've got to decide what I'm going to do, and I had this sense of urgency, and one of our priests in the formation came to visit, and I remember I was telling him all of this, and I said, I feel like the rich young man that I have to sell everything I have and go and be with the poor, and if I don't do it, if I make the wrong choice, I'll be condemned, I'll go away sad. And he said, well, the rich young man probably had a number of times that he was invited to follow Jesus, you know, and so that sense of urgency that I had, I think that propelled me into saying yes to a deeper vocation. So I share that with you, but today we know that you can be a missionary. You don't have to go to Brazil or in a foreign country to be a missionary, or the Congo, or wherever. We can be missionaries right here, and in fact, at Scarboro Missions, in our talks, in our meetings, our chapters, most of the priests were saying, it's fine, mission can be over there, in the Philippines, or in India, or Malawi, or Peru. But more than ever, missions here in Canada, and we know that because there's so few people that are living the faith. There's so many power structures here that promote unjust structures throughout the world, that it's important for us as the people of God here in Canada to have faith and to be prophetic here and to be witnesses and to be a little tea light of hope and light for Toronto, for Ontario, for Canada. And in fact, Pope Francis said that in his letter for World Mission Sunday, which was October the 20th. The missionary spirit is not only about geographical territories, but about peoples, cultures, and individuals, because the boundaries of faith do not only cross places and human traditions, but the heart of each man and each woman. So the mission territory is in our hearts, and it's the heart of each people that we meet on a daily basis.